My name is Rachel Monroe, and I'm 34 years old. For 16 of those years, I wore a uniform, served my country, and held on to the dream of one day coming home to a family that was proud of me. I thought that day had finally come. I was wrong. The welcome I got wasn't a hug or a handshake. It was a text message that blew my world apart more completely than any roadside bomb ever could. But before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, and drop a comment to let me know where you're watching from. The discharge papers felt heavier than my rucksack ever had. They were a stack of crisp, bureaucratic paper, but to me they were freedom. 16 years in the Army, 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq, and more surgeries than I cared to count. My body was a roadmap of scars and healed fractures, but my spirit was, for the first time in a long time, whole. I was done. I was going home. My apartment was barely a step up from base housing, a small furnished box just outside Fort Lewis with beige walls and a window that overlooked a parking lot, but it was mine and it was temporary. In my hand, I clutched a plane ticket to Ohio, Flight 1422, Seattle to Columbus, arriving December 23rd, just in time for Christmas Eve. For days, I'd been living inside a fantasy. I could almost smell my mom's gingerbread cookies. I could hear the familiar creak of the 3rd step on the stairs to my old bedroom. I pictured my dad in his worn-out recliner, maybe even cracking a small, rare smile when I walked through the door. I imagined my brother, Tyler, clapping me on the shoulder, the way he did when we were kids. This wasn't just a visit. It was supposed to be a homecoming. The real one. The one I had been earning for half my life. I had just finished packing my last duffel bag, the scent of canvas and worn leather filling the small room. My phone, which had been silent for most of the day, buzzed on the cheap particle board nightstand. I picked it up, expecting a confirmation email from the airline, or maybe a text from one of my Army buddies wishing me well. It was from Dad. My heart did a little jump. He rarely texted. Maybe this was it. Maybe he was asking what time my flight landed. Maybe Mom wanted to know what I wanted for Christmas dinner. My thumb swiped across the screen. There was no greeting. No hi, Rachel. Just 5 words that landed with the force of a physical blow. Don't bother coming. I read the text once, twice, a 3rd time. The words didn't change. They just sat there on the brightly lit screen, stark and brutal. There was no punctuation, no explanation, just a command. An order of exile. The blinking lights from the sad little plastic tree I'd bought at a drugstore suddenly felt like they were mocking me. Each colorful flash a tiny spotlight on my fresh, gaping wound. My service was over, but I had never felt more dismissed. The phone felt unnaturally heavy in my hand, as if its weight had increased with the gravity of the words on its screen. For a long moment, I didn't move. I just stared, my brain refusing to process the message. It had to be a mistake. A typo meant for someone else. Maybe he was texting a contractor about a job at the house. Don't bother coming today, the weather's bad. That made sense. That was logical. My mind scrambled for any plausible explanation that didn't involve the cold, hard truth that was staring me in the face. My father, the man whose approval I had chased across continents and through war zones, had just uninvited me from my own home. From Christmas. My breath hitched, and a cold dread, colder than any winter morning in the field, began to creep up my spine. My training, the instinct honed over years of crisis, took over. Assess, analyze, confirm. I needed more information. A single text was not actionable intelligence. I pressed the call button beneath his name. My thumb felt clumsy, disconnected from my brain. The phone began to ring, the electronic tone echoing in the crushing silence of my small apartment. Each ring was a lifetime. The first ring was hopeful. He'll pick up and laugh, say it was a stupid joke. The second ring was anxious. Why isn't he picking up? The third ring was laced with panic. He saw my name. He knows I'm calling about the text. Before the 4th ring could finish, there was a click, and his recorded voice, a flat, uninviting monotone, filled my ear. You've reached John Monroe. Leave a message. He hadn't just missed the call. He'd rejected it. I knew the difference. A missed call rings and rings. A rejected call is cut short, silenced with a deliberate press of a button. He had seen my name, my picture, flash across his screen and had actively chosen not to speak to me. The knowledge was a punch to the gut, knocking the air from my lungs. I hung up without leaving a message. What could I say? Dad, it's me, the daughter you just exiled via text message. Just calling to confirm my banishment. The sarcasm in my own head tasted bitter. Okay, new plan. My mother. She was the family's emotional barometer, the one who smoothed over my father's rough edges. She would never let this happen. Maybe he was in a bad mood. Maybe something had happened that I didn't know about, and she would be the one to fix it, to explain. I held on to that sliver of hope as I found her name in my contacts. I remembered being a little girl, maybe 7 or 8, falling off my bike and scraping my knee down to the bone. I had run home, crying, and my mother had scooped me up, cleaned the wound with a gentle touch, and told me I was the bravest girl in the world. She was my safe harbor, my port in any storm. Surely she would be that now. The phone rang, and unlike with my dad, it kept ringing. 4 times, 5, 6. With each unanswered ring, the memory of her comfort felt more and more distant, like a story about someone else. Finally, it clicked to voicemail. "Hi, it's Susan. Sorry I missed you. Leave a message and I'll call you back. Merry Christmas!" Her voice was so bright, so cheerful, so utterly normal. It was the voice of a woman looking forward to the holidays, a woman whose life was untouched by the bomb that had just gone off in mine. The casual Merry Christmas was a twisting of the knife. How could she have that message on her phone knowing what her husband had just done? The only possible answer was that she agreed with it. She was a party to it. The image of her as a safe harbor dissolved, replaced by the reality of her as a silent accomplice. My mother, the gentle mediator, had chosen a side. It wasn't mine. I hung up, a wave of nausea washing over me. There was one last option. My brother, Tyler. We weren't as close as we used to be. His life of marriage, kids, and a 9-to-5 job in our hometown felt a world away from my life of deployments and discipline. But the bond of childhood was still there, wasn't it? I remembered one sweltering summer when I was 12 and he was 8. He'd fallen out of the oak tree in our backyard and broken his arm. I had carried him all the way back to the house, his small body trembling in my arms, whispering that he was going to be okay. We were a team then. He was my little brother, and I was his protector. I couldn't bring myself to call him, to risk hearing the same rejection in his voice. A text felt safer, less direct. My fingers flew across the screen, my message carefully worded to sound casual, unpanicked. "Hey, just got a weird text from Dad. Is everything okay over there?" I sent it and then stared at the screen, my body rigid with tension. The message status immediately showed delivered. For a minute, nothing happened. I imagined him seeing the text, maybe showing it to his wife, a frown on his face. Then, the status changed. Should my heart hammered against my ribs. He'd seen it. He was going to reply. He would be the one to tell me what was going on. I waited. 1 minute passed. Then 2, then 5. The 3 little dots that indicated someone was typing never appeared. The screen remained blank, my question hanging in the digital void, answered only by his profound and total silence. He had read my message and made a choice. He chose not to answer. He chose them. The little boy I had carried out of the woods was gone. In his place was a man who stood with my parents, leaving me on the outside. It was the silence that broke me. My father's text was the initial blast, but the silence from my mother and brother was the devastating fallout. It confirmed the attack wasn't from a single rogue agent. It was a coordinated strike. They had all agreed. I was out. I stood up from the bed and began to pace the small room, my movements stiff and robotic. My gaze fell on the packed duffel bags by the door, the plane tickets sitting on the nightstand, the artifacts of a future that had been canceled. Everything was ready for my homecoming. Everything except the home itself. I walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot. A family was loading their car, 2 small children laughing as their father lifted them into their car seats. The mother smiled, adjusting the wreath on their front door before getting in. A perfect happy family heading off to do some Christmas shopping. It was so painfully normal. A life so close, yet so completely out of my reach. The cold silence from my family wasn't just a lack of communication. It was a verdict. It was a statement that my 16 years of service, my sacrifices, my very existence were not enough to earn me a place at their table. I was a soldier trained to identify threats, and for the first time, I understood that the greatest threat to my well-being wasn't on a foreign battlefield. It was in the house I grew up in, hiding behind a wall of silence. The foundation for this betrayal wasn't laid with a single text message. It had been built brick by brick over 16 years of indifference. They never wanted a soldier. They wanted a reflection of themselves, a daughter who would follow the well-worn path of our small Ohio town. My decision to enlist was not seen as an act of patriotism or a quest for purpose. It was an act of rebellion, a rejection of the life they had planned for me. I remember the night I told them as if it were yesterday. We were sitting around the dinner table, the air thick with the smell of my mom's meatloaf. I had the recruiter's pamphlet tucked into my back pocket, the crisp folds a secret comfort. I'd practiced my speech 100 times. a blend of youthful idealism and a desperate plea for their understanding. "I have something to tell you," I started, my voice shaking slightly. "I've been talking to an army recruiter. I'm going to enlist after graduation." My mother's fork clattered against her plate. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disappointment. "Rachel, no, the army? It's for boys. It's dangerous. Why would you want to do something like that?" Her questions weren't born of curiosity, but of a deep-seated disapproval. My father didn't even look up from cutting his meatloaf. He continued to saw at it with methodical precision. The silence stretched for an eternity before he finally spoke, his voice low and laced with a dismissive edge. "So you're going to go play soldier? Don't come crying to us when you wash out." He took a bite of food, a clear signal that the conversation was over. Tyler, who was 14 at the time, just stared down at his plate, tracing the patterns with his fork. He didn't say a word. He didn't look at me. He was already learning the family rule. Dad has spoken. The verdict is in. That dinner set the tone for everything that followed. My basic training graduation should have been a proud day. After weeks of being broken down and rebuilt, of pushing my body and mind to their absolute limits, I was finally a soldier. I stood on the parade ground at Fort Jackson, my uniform stiff and perfectly pressed, my heart swelling with a sense of accomplishment I had never known. I scanned the crowded bleachers, searching for my family. I found them near the back, looking out of place and deeply uncomfortable. My dad had his arms crossed, a permanent scowl etched on his face. My mom was fanning herself with a program, her expression pained. When the ceremony was over, I rushed to them, a wide grin on my face. Other families were cheering, hugging their sons and daughters, tears of pride streaming down their faces. My welcome was a stark contrast. My mom gave me a brief, awkward hug, her hands patting my back as if I were a stranger. "You're so thin, Rachel. Are they feeding you enough?" she asked, her focus on my physical appearance rather than my achievement. My dad just gave me a curt nod. "Let's get some lunch. We have a long drive back," he said, already turning towards the parking lot. There was no congratulations. No, "we're proud of you." The entire day was treated as an obligation, a tiresome chore they had to complete before they could get back to their real lives. Over a silent, tense lunch at a chain restaurant off the highway, the only comment my father made about my new career was about the cost of the trip. "This weekend cost a fortune in gas," he grumbled into his burger. I felt like a financial liability, an embarrassing inconvenience they had to endure. This pattern of dismissal continued throughout my career. I tried, foolishly, to share my world with them. When I was first stationed in Germany, I was mesmerized by the history, the culture. I sent them a long, detailed email about a trip I took to see the old castles along the Rhine River, complete with photos. My dad's reply was a single question. "Have you looked into the cost of shipping a cuckoo clock back here?" My experiences were irrelevant. My value was purely transactional. The indifference became even more pronounced when I was deployed. During my first tour in Afghanistan, an IED hit the convoy ahead of mine. It was a close call, a terrifying reminder of my own mortality. Shaken, I waited for hours at the communications tent to get a call through to them. I needed to hear their voices, to feel a connection to home. When I finally got my mom on the line, her voice was distracted. "Rachel, is everything okay?" "I'm in the middle of grocery shopping." "I'm fine, Mom," I said, my voice weak. "Just wanted to call and say hi. Something happened today." "Oh? Well, listen, I have to run. Tyler's having some trouble with his car, and your father is in a mood. We'll talk soon, okay?" And with that, she was gone. I stood in a dusty tent, half a world away, the smell of sand and fear in the air, holding a dead phone. My near-death experience was less important than my brother's car trouble. The visits home were no better. They were never a vacation for me. They were a work detail. I was the designated driver, the one who fixed the leaky faucet, cleaned the gutters, and moved heavy furniture. My father's justification was always the same. "You're in the army. You're strong. You can handle it." My skills and strength, earned through rigorous training and discipline, were reduced to making me a more efficient handyman. One Thanksgiving, I came home after a grueling 6-month deployment. I was exhausted mentally and physically. All I wanted was to sit on the couch and do nothing. But the moment I walked in the door, my dad pointed to a massive pile of firewood in the driveway. "Glad you're here. That needs to be stacked before the snow comes." I spent the next 2 days hauling and stacking wood, my muscles aching, while Tyler and my dad watched football. Not once did they offer to help. When I was finished, my reward was my mother telling me I had tracked dirt into the house. Every one of these moments was a brick in the wall they were building between us. I was the outsider, the strange, uniformed daughter who didn't fit into their neat suburban picture. They didn't see my sacrifice. They didn't see my honor or my courage. They saw a girl who had made a weird choice, a girl who was useful for certain tasks, but was not, in any meaningful way, one of them. The soldier was a role I played for my country, but it was also a costume that rendered me invisible to my own family. A rational person would have given up. A logical mind would have assessed the situation, recognized the futility of the mission, and retreated. But when it comes to family, logic rarely plays a part. For 16 years, I operated on a fuel called hope, a stubborn, illogical belief that my next action, my next gesture, would be the one to finally break through their wall of indifference. This hope was a fundamental part of my identity, as ingrained as my military bearing. It was the mission I could never bring myself to abort. This relentless pursuit of their approval started long before I ever put on a uniform. I was a child who brought home straight A's, hoping for a well done that rarely came. I was the teenager who worked a part-time job to buy her own car, only to have my father complain about the insurance costs. The Army was, in a strange way, just an extension of that same pattern. It was the grandest gesture I could imagine to prove my worth, my discipline, my seriousness. And when that wasn't enough, I doubled down. My first deployment to Iraq was a financial turning point for me. Combat pay, hazardous duty pay, and a tax-free income meant that for the first time in my life, I had significant disposable income. I didn't spend it on myself. Instead, I saw it as a new tool in my arsenal, a new way to earn their affection. My parents had always been stressed about money, their arguments about bills a constant, low-level hum in the background of my childhood. I thought, naively, that if I could ease that burden, it would clear the way for love. I remember the first time I sent them a large sum of money. My dad had sent a rare, curt email mentioning that the property taxes were due and that things were tight. I went to the finance office on base, my heart pounding with a nervous excitement. I arranged a wire transfer for $3,000, almost everything I had saved. I imagined their relief, their gratitude. I pictured my mom calling me, her voice filled with warmth, thanking me for being such a thoughtful daughter. The reality was a one-sentence email from my dad a week later. The wire came through. That was it. No thank you. No questions about how I was doing. It was a receipt, not a message of gratitude. I told myself it was just his way, that he was a man of few words. But a part of me knew the truth. I hadn't bought their love. I had just paid a bill. I had become a utility. But hope is a stubborn weed. It kept growing back, no matter how many times it was cut down. The next time, it took the form of their wedding anniversary. It was their 30th. From my barracks room in South Korea, I spent weeks planning a surprise. I used a grainy video chat to coordinate with Tyler, asking him to book a table at their favorite restaurant in town. I ordered flowers to be delivered to their house. The centerpiece of the gift was a photo album I had painstakingly created online, filled with pictures from their life together, which I had secretly gotten from relatives. I paid for everything with my credit card over the phone, the international charges piling up. On the day of their anniversary, I waited by the phone expecting a call. Evening in Ohio was the middle of the night for me, but I didn't care. I stayed up jittery with anticipation. The call never came. The next morning, I got an email from my mom. "Thank you for the lovely dinner and flowers, Rachel. The photo album was nice, but you put a picture of your father with his ex-girlfriend from high school in it. He was not pleased." She was referring to a group photo from their high school prom where his old girlfriend was in the background. It was an honest mistake, a detail I couldn't have possibly seen on a low-resolution scan of a 40-year-old photograph. But that mistake was all she focused on. My weeks of planning, my expense, my heartfelt effort, all of it was eclipsed by one tiny, unintentional error. I hadn't created a moment of joy. I had created an inconvenience. Even Tyler, my co-conspirator, offered no comfort. When I texted him to ask how it went, he just replied, "Yeah, Dad was kinda mad about that pic. You should have checked it more carefully." There was no defense of my intentions, just a siding with their disproportionate reaction. These gestures were my battlefield promotions, my medals of honor in a war only I was fighting. Each attempt was a new strategy, a new hope for a breakthrough. I sent care packages filled with their favorite coffee and snacks, things I couldn't even get for myself on base. They never once sent me a package in return. I used my limited leave time not for vacations to exotic places, but to fly back to Ohio to fix their broken porch swing or help them clean out the garage. This hope wasn't just about them. It was about me. It was about the story I told myself to survive the loneliness. The story was that I had a loving family waiting for me back home, a family whose affection I just had to work a little harder to unlock. Admitting that this family didn't exist would have meant admitting that I was truly, completely alone. That was a truth too terrifying to face in the middle of a war zone. So I kept hoping. I kept trying. I clung to the fantasy of that perfect homecoming, the one where I would finally walk through the door and the mission would be complete. I would finally hear them say, "Welcome home, Rachel. We're proud of you." It was a mirage I chased across the desert for 16 years, and I never realized until now that the closer I got, the further it moved away. This Christmas was supposed to be the end of the war, not just my war in the army, but my private 16-year-long war for acceptance. My discharge from the military was my unconditional surrender in the fight to prove my worth through service. I was coming home without a uniform, without a deployment date looming over me. I was coming home simply as Rachel, their daughter. That, I believed, had to be enough. In the quiet nights leading up to my final out-processing, I would lie on my stiff cot and construct the perfect homecoming in my mind. It was a movie I played on a loop, each scene meticulously detailed. I didn't dream of marching bands or a hero's welcome. My dreams were smaller, more intimate, and infinitely more precious. I dreamt of the kitchen. It was the heart of our house, a warm, slightly cluttered room that always smelled of coffee and whatever my mom was baking. In my dream, I would walk in on the morning of Christmas Eve to find her humming along to a holiday tune on the radio, her hands dusted with flour. She'd look up and her face would break into a genuine, unforced smile. "There you are," she'd say. "Grab an apron. You're on gingerbread duty." We would spend the morning side by side, rolling out dough, pressing cookie cutters into it, and I would tell her things, not about the horrors of war, but about the funny little details, the terrible food, the strange customs, the friends I'd made, and she would listen, really listen, asking questions not out of obligation, but out of love. Then I would drift into the living room. The Christmas tree would be in its usual spot by the big picture window, overloaded with years of mismatched ornaments. My dad would be in his worn-out brown leather recliner, a newspaper spread across his lap. In my fantasy, he would put the paper down as I entered. He would look at me over the top of his reading glasses, and his eyes, for once, wouldn't be filled with disapproval or indifference. He'd gesture to the chair opposite him. "Sit down a minute," he'd say. "Tell me what you're going to do now that you're a civilian." The question itself was the gift. It was an acknowledgement of my future, a sign that he saw me as a person with plans and dreams, not just a problem to be managed. My brother, Tyler, would be there too, his 2 kids. My niece and nephew, whom I'd only ever met through a screen, climbing all over him. He would see me, and his face would light up. "Aunt Rachel!" he'd shout, and the kids would run to me, suddenly shy but curious. I would sink to the floor with them, showing them how to build a complicated Lego spaceship, and I would feel the unfamiliar sensation of being part of a family, of being an aunt, of having a place that wasn't temporary. These were the scenes that played in my head. They were my shield against the years of coldness. They were the promise I made to myself. This is what you fought for. This is what you've earned. My father's 5-word text message was a precision-guided missile that targeted and destroyed every single one of those dreams. It didn't just cancel my visit. It invalidated my entire 16-year struggle. It was a final, definitive statement. It was never the uniform. It was never the distance. It was you. We do not want you. The pain was a physical thing. It felt like a core muscle tear, a deep internal rupture. I have been shot at. I have had bones broken. I have felt the searing heat of an explosion too close for comfort. But the pain of combat is different. In a firefight, you know where the enemy is. You have a weapon. You have training. You have a mission. You fight back. This was an attack from my own command. It was a betrayal from within the wire, from the very people who were supposed to be my safe zone. You go to war to protect your home, to protect your family? What happens when your family is the one launching the attack? What do you do when you realize that the home you've been fighting for doesn't want you in it? There is no training for that. There is no protocol for that kind of wound. I sat on my bed, the phone still in my hand, and looked around my sterile, temporary apartment. The beige walls seemed to be closing in. The blinking Christmas lights on my pathetic little tree felt like tiny, cruel stars, cold and distant. I scrolled up through the last few months of text messages between my dad and me. It was a sad, one-sided history. Long, newsy texts from me about my discharge date, my flight plans, my excitement about seeing them. His replies were all 1 or 2 words. Okay, good, fine. The evidence had been there all along. I had just refused to see it. The tears that finally came weren't the hot, messy tears of sadness. They were cold, silent tears of rage. A rage at them for their cruelty, and a rage at myself for my own bottomless, idiotic hope. I had given them my youth, my loyalty, my money, and my heart, and they had given me nothing in return. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. My first instinct was to write a novel of pain and accusation. How could you? After everything I've done? But what was the point? They knew what they were doing. This was deliberate. They didn't need me to explain their own cruelty to them. So I erased the angry paragraph. I erased the pleading questions. I erased everything until only one word remained. It was the same word he had used in his texts to me. A word of dismissal. A word that ended conversations. A word that built walls. It was the end of my 16-year mission. It was my concession of defeat, but it was also my declaration of independence. It was me, finally, putting down my weapon in this long, losing war. I whispered it out loud to the empty room, my voice hoarse. Fine. Then I typed the word and hit send. The message was delivered. There was no reply. I didn't expect one. After I hit send on that single desolate word, fine, the world didn't just go quiet. It ceased to exist. The 4 beige walls of my apartment became the absolute boundary of my universe. For the first 24 hours, I didn't move from the cheap, lumpy sofa. The phone, now a source of pure poison, lay face down on the coffee table, silenced. I didn't want to know if they replied. A reply would be an invitation to engage, to argue, to feel. Silence was a void, and in that moment, the void felt safer than their words. My mind, unmoored from the discipline of military life, became a battlefield of its own. Every memory of my family was exhumed and put on trial. I replayed conversations from years ago, searching for clues I had missed, for the exact moment the fault line had formed. Was it the day I signed the enlistment papers? The ultimate act of choosing a path they hadn't laid for me? Was it the time I missed Tyler's college graduation because I was in a pre-deployment quarantine? A fact they saw as a flimsy excuse? I dissected every interaction, every lukewarm phone call, every holiday gift acknowledged with a curt email. In the dark, lonely theater of my mind, I was both prosecutor and defendant, relentlessly seeking the cause for my own exile, and always concluding that the fault must lie with me. I was the one who left. I was the one who was different. I was the one who was apparently unlovable. The outside world tried to intrude. A cheerful, automated email from the airline reminded me to check in for my flight home. The notification lit up the dark screen of my phone, and the cheerful corporate logo felt like a cruel joke. Home. The word had lost all meaning. Later, a text from my old platoon sergeant Dave buzzed through. Wheels down in Ohio yet, Monroe? Don't get too soft in the civilian world. I stared at his name, at the casual camaraderie in his message. I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth. What would I say? Actually, my family disowned me via text, so I'm currently staring at a wall in my empty apartment. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest. I typed back a lie, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. Yep, good to be back. Talk soon. The effort to seem normal was monumental. On the second day, the dam of my military composure finally broke. It wasn't a single event that caused it, but the crushing accumulation of silence and sorrow. I was standing in the kitchen, staring into the empty refrigerator, when a wave of such profound loss washed over me that my knees buckled. It wasn't just the loss of a Christmas visit. It was the loss of an entire lifetime of hope. The sob that ripped out of me was a raw animal sound, a sound I didn't recognize as my own. 16 years of repressed disappointment, of biting my tongue, of swallowing my hurt. It all came pouring out. I sank to the linoleum floor, my body shaking with a grief so violent it felt like it would tear me apart. This was the bottom. This was the sound of a soldier finally surrendering. The breakdown was a purge. When the tears finally subsided, I was left with a chilling emptiness, a landscape cleared by a firestorm. And in that empty space, a single ingrained instinct flickered to life. Discipline. When your world falls apart, you control what you can. I pushed myself up from the floor, my limbs feeling heavy and bruised. I walked into the bathroom and turned the shower on, the water as hot as I could stand it. I stood under the spray until the steam filled the room, washing away the grime of 2 days of inertia. Then, I began to clean. I scrubbed the tiny kitchen until the counters gleamed. I vacuumed the thin carpet. I packed my civilian clothes into neat, tight rolls, just as I'd been taught in basic training. I created order in my immediate surroundings, a desperate attempt to impose structure on the chaos raging inside me. My final task was to confront the footlocker. It sat in the corner of the room, a scarred green metal box that held the entire paper trail of my adult life. It was time to assess my assets, to figure out what was next. My life as a daughter was over. My life as a soldier was over. I had to figure out who Rachel Monroe was going to be now. I sat on the floor and opened the heavy lid. The smell of old paper and canvas filled the air. I began to sort through the files, my movements mechanical. Here were my fitness reports, my weapons qualifications, my promotion warrants. Each document was a testament to a life they had never cared to understand. Tucked between my medical records and a file of old pay stubs was a thick manila folder I hadn't looked at in years. The label, written in my father's blocky handwriting, read, Monroe Property. Curiosity, the first real emotion other than grief I had felt in days, prompted me to open it. The memory came rushing back, sharp and unpleasant. I was 21, home on a short leave before my first deployment. My father, a man who had never once shown vulnerability, sat me at the kitchen table with a stack of papers, his face pale with stress. His business had gone under, and the bank was going to take the house. His voice was a low, urgent murmur as he explained the situation. My credit was clean, my government paycheck a beacon of stability. He needed me to co-sign. "It's just a formality, Rachel," he'd said, pushing the papers towards me, his eyes avoiding mine. "Your name on the paper saves the family home. It doesn't mean anything beyond that. You're our only hope." I remember the powerful pull of those words. Saving the family home. It was a chance to finally be essential, to be the hero. My mother hovered in the background, her expression anxious and pleading. Tyler had been sent to his room. It was a carefully staged ambush. I was so desperate for his approval, for a single sign that I was a valued member of the family, that I didn't hesitate. I didn't read the fine print. I signed my name where his finger pointed, my signature a testament to my blind, desperate hope. Now, on the floor of my apartment, I was no longer that naive girl. I was a woman who had negotiated contracts for military supplies, who had read through dense operational orders where a single misunderstood phrase could have deadly consequences. I began to read the document with a soldier's focus. I read every clause, every addendum. My phone was next to me, and I looked up the legal terms I didn't understand. And then I found it. Buried on page 8, in a section titled Ownership and Title Agreement, was the clause that changed everything. Due to my father's catastrophic credit rating, the bank had demanded a failsafe. The loan's primary guarantor, me, was to be listed as the majority title holder. My eyes scanned the page, landing on the stark, unchangeable numbers. John Monroe, 49%. Rachel S. Monroe, 51%. I dropped the paper as if it had burned my hand. I stared at the wall, my mind racing, recalibrating 16 years of history. This wasn't just a house. It was leverage. It was power. My father had used my good name to secure his kingdom, all while treating me as a disposable outsider. He had handed me the master key, confident that I would be too distant, too dutiful, too stupid to ever realize I held it. His text message, "Don't bother coming," played in my mind again, but its meaning had transformed. It was no longer just an act of emotional cruelty. It was an act of profound, arrogant foolishness. He had banished the queen from a castle she didn't know she owned. A cold, hard fire began to burn in the empty space where my grief had been. The daughter in me was dead, killed by their betrayal, but the soldier had just been given a new mission. The morning after the discovery, I woke up before dawn. For the first time in days, the suffocating blanket of grief had lifted, replaced by a chilling, razor-sharp clarity. The pain was still there, a hard, dense object lodged in my chest, but it was no longer my compass. It was fuel. I made a pot of strong, black coffee, the ritual a small act of reclaiming normalcy. I sat at my small table, the mortgage documents spread out before me under the stark light of the kitchen fixture. I read the ownership clause again, and then a third time, confirming that the words were not a figment of my sleep-deprived imagination. They were real. They were binding. My military training had conditioned me to respond to a shift in battlefield dynamics with a new plan. My life was now a different kind of battlefield, and my family, I had to painfully admit, was the opposing force. My objective was no longer to win their affection. That was a lost cause, a hill not worth dying on. The new objective was to secure my asset and reclaim the power they had systematically stripped from me. My first move was to gather intelligence. I knew I was out of my depth legally. I spent the morning researching law firms, specifically looking for those with experience in property law and a history of working with veterans. I made a list, my handwriting steady and precise. The first 2 firms I called were dead ends. One didn't have an opening for a consultation for weeks. The other was prohibitively expensive. The third call was different. I was connected to a paralegal at a firm called Albright & Associates. When I mentioned I was a recently discharged Army sergeant, Her tone shifted from briskly professional to warm and engaging. She told me that the firm's senior partner, Ms. Albright, made it a priority to offer pro bono consultations to veterans. I had an appointment for the following afternoon. I spent the rest of the day preparing for that meeting as if it were a mission briefing. I organized all my documents into a neat folder. I wrote a timeline of events, detailing every financial transaction I had made for my family, from the large wire transfers to the smaller gifts. I wanted to present a case, not a sob story. Walking into the law firm's sleek downtown office felt like entering another world. I wore my dress uniform, the familiar weight of the jacket a source of comfort and strength. Ms. Albright was a woman in her 50s with intelligent eyes and a handshake that was firm and direct. She listened without interruption as I laid out the entire 16-year history, my voice even and measured. I presented the facts, the text messages, the bank statements, and finally, the mortgage agreement. She took the document and read it in a silence that stretched for several minutes. Her focus was so intense it was as if she was absorbing every word through her fingertips. Finally, she laid the paper on her polished desk and looked at me. "Sergeant Monroe," she began, her voice devoid of pity, but full of a steely resolve that I recognized. In my 25 years of practicing law, I have seen many forms of familial exploitation. This is one of the most brazen. What your father did was not just ask for a favor. He leveraged your trust and your financial stability to secure an asset for himself, all while, it seems, fostering an environment where you would never feel empowered to question the arrangement. Her words were a profound validation. She wasn't just seeing the legal angles, she was seeing the psychological manipulation, the long, slow erosion of my position in the family. She was the first person to look at the situation and confirm that I wasn't crazy, that my hurt was justified. "Legally," she continued, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on the ownership clause, "you are in an unequivocally powerful position. The document is clear. You have a controlling interest. This gives you several options. You could force a buyout, where your father would have to secure a new loan to buy your 51% share. Given his financial history, that seems unlikely. You could force a sale of the property, in which case the proceeds would be split according to your ownership percentages. Or you could initiate eviction proceedings against the other residents and take full possession of the property yourself." She laid the options out like tactical maneuvers on a map. Each one was a step further into a conflict I had never wanted, but which had been thrust upon me. We spent another hour discussing the implications of each path. She warned me that my family would likely react with aggression, denial, and emotional blackmail. "They will paint you as the villain, Rachel," she said, using my first name for the first time. "You need to be prepared for that. They will try to make this about family and feelings. Your strength will be in keeping it about the law and the facts." I left her office with a clear path forward. Negotiation was off the table. Any conversation would devolve into the same old patterns of guilt and manipulation. I had to break the cycle, and the only way to do that was to use a language they couldn't argue with, the language of the law. That night, back in my apartment, I sat down to compose the letter. I opened a new document, and my first instinct was to pour out 16 years of pain onto the page. "How could you, after everything I've done for you?" But then I heard Ms. Albright's voice in my head, strip the emotion out. "This is a business transaction." I deleted the angry, wounded words. I wrote and rewrote the letter until it was as cold and impersonal as a military directive. It was a formal notification, nothing more. It offered no explanation, no room for debate. It simply stated a legal fact. The next morning, I walked to the post office. The air was crisp, and I felt a strange sense of calm purpose. The act of sending the letter was the real point of no return. I handed the envelope to the postal clerk. "Certified mail, please," I said. "Return receipt." I paid the fee and watched as he affixed the green stickers and stamped the envelope with a resounding thud. He handed me my receipt, and I dropped the letter into the outgoing mail slot. The metallic clang echoed the closing of a door on my past. As I walked out of the post office and back into the cold January air, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to their actions. I was making them react to mine. The wait for the receipt to be returned was a new kind of silence. It wasn't the silence of being ignored, but the charged silence of a fuse being lit. During that week, I started my real work. I researched property managers in Ohio. I started boxing up my apartment, not with the aimless sorrow of before, but with a clear sense of purpose. I was packing for my next duty station. When the green return receipt card finally appeared in my mailbox, I saw my father's signature. It was a jagged, angry scrawl. nothing like his usual neat script. It was the first concrete evidence that my message had been received, that the foundations of their world had begun to shake. The 2 weeks of silence that followed were deafening. I knew what it meant. They were in shock. They were scrambling, consulting lawyers, trying to find a way out. They were underestimating me, assuming this was a threat, a bluff from a hurt child. They still didn't understand. I wasn't their child anymore. I was a majority shareholder, and I was coming to inspect my asset. The flight to Ohio was a surreal experience. It was the same flight path, the same journey I had planned for my joyful Christmas homecoming. I looked out the window at the endless expanse of clouds below and felt a profound sense of detachment. I wasn't a daughter flying home for the holidays. I was a commander flying into a contested zone. I spent the flight reviewing the notes I had taken during my meetings with Ms. Albright, mentally rehearsing my role. My instructions were simple: stay calm, say little, and do not, under any circumstances, allow them to draw me into an emotional argument. My presence was my statement. My silence was my strength. I met Ms. Albright and Mr. Evans, the property manager, at a sterile coffee shop in the arrivals terminal of the Columbus airport. Mr. Evans was a tall, stoic man in his 60s whose calm demeanor was immediately reassuring. Ms. Albright, impeccably dressed in a dark business suit, conducted the meeting like a pre-mission briefing. "Mr. Evans," she began, "your role today is purely observational. I need you to do a preliminary assessment of the property's condition. Take notes on any obvious maintenance issues. Do not engage with the residents." He nodded, understanding. Then she turned to me. "Rachel, this is going to be the hardest part. They will say things designed to wound you, to provoke a reaction. They will call you ungrateful, selfish, cruel. They will bring up your childhood. They will cry. They will yell. You must think of it as enemy fire. You don't engage. You hold your position. Your position is one of quiet legal authority. Let me handle the talking. Are you ready?" I took a deep breath. "Yes," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm ready." The drive to my childhood home was a journey through a landscape of ghosts. Every familiar landmark, the corner store where I bought candy as a kid, the park where I scraped my knee, the high school I had been so desperate to escape, triggered a cascade of memories. I felt the girl I used to be sitting beside me in the car, her heart filled with a confusing mix of love and pain for the family she was about to confront. I had to consciously push her away, reminding myself that the girl who lived here was gone. The woman in this car was someone else entirely. When we pulled onto Windmere Lane, the house looked smaller and shabbier than I remembered. The paint was peeling slightly on the shutters, and a patch of lawn near the driveway was brown and dead. It was just a house, a simple wood-frame structure on a quiet suburban street. It was hard to believe this small building had held such immense power over my life. We walked up the familiar concrete path. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I stood slightly behind Ms. Albright as she pressed the doorbell. We could hear the faint sound of a television inside. A long moment passed before the door creaked open. My father stood there, a half-eaten sandwich in his hand. He saw me first, and his face cycled through a series of emotions in a matter of seconds. Confusion, disbelief, and then a dark, gathering fury. His eyes flickered to Ms. Albright in her sharp suit and Mr. Evans with his clipboard, and the confusion vanished, replaced by pure rage. "What in God's name is this?" he snarled, his voice a low growl. His eyes were locked on me, pinning me with a look of utter betrayal. "I told you not to come here. You have no right." "On the contrary, Mr. Monroe," Ms. Albright said, her voice cutting through his anger with surgical precision. "She has every right. I am Ms. Albright, Rachel's attorney. We are here to discuss the legal status of this property as outlined in the letter you received. It would be best for everyone if we could conduct this conversation in a civilized manner. May we come in?" Her calm, authoritative tone seemed to momentarily stun him. He stepped back reluctantly, allowing us to enter the living room. The house smelled the same, a mixture of my mother's potpourri and something fried. My mother emerged from the kitchen, her face etched with worry. "John, what's all the shouting?" She stopped dead when she saw me, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes filled with the wide, wounded look I knew so well. Behind her, my brother Tyler appeared at the top of the stairs, drawn by the commotion. He froze, his face paling as he took in the scene. We stood in the center of the room while they gathered on the sofa, a defensive huddle against the invasion. The family photos on the mantelpiece seemed to mock us. There they were, smiling at Tyler's wedding, on a family vacation to the beach. I scanned them quickly. There were no recent photos of me. I had been slowly erased long before this final confrontation. Ms. Albright began to speak, her voice a calm, steady anchor in the churning sea of tension. She didn't raise her voice. She simply stated facts. She explained the legal validity of the ownership agreement. She explained my rights as the majority owner. She explained that we were here today to begin the process of me taking control of my asset. As she spoke, I watched their masks crumble. My father's rage simmered, his knuckles white where he gripped the armrest of the sofa. My mother began to cry, not with loud, messy sobs, but with silent, strategic tears that welled in her eyes and streamed down her cheeks, a performance of victimhood she had perfected over a lifetime. When Ms. Albright finished, my father surged to his feet. "This is garbage, a trick. That was a formality. You think you can just walk in here with some shyster lawyer and steal my house?" He bellowed, his face crimson. "It is not your house to steal, Mr. Monroe," Ms. Albright countered calmly. "You gave up that right when you signed this agreement." My mother turned her tear-filled eyes to me. "Rachel, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "How can you do this? We're your family. I'm your mother. I stayed up with you when you had the chicken pox. I held your hand on your first day of school. Have you forgotten all of that? Is this how you repay a lifetime of love?" Her words were carefully chosen arrows, dipped in the poison of guilt. The younger me would have crumbled, would have apologized, would have done anything to stop her tears. But the woman standing in that living room saw the performance for what it was, a desperate, manipulative tactic. Tyler finally stumbled down the stairs, his hands raised as if to stop a physical fight. "Rach, listen, this has gone too far," he pleaded, his voice cracking with panic. "Okay, so Dad made a mistake, but you can't do this. Think about Mom and Dad. Think about my kids. You're going to make your own niece and nephew homeless. Is that what you want?" They swarmed me with their words, their accusations, their history. I was selfish. I was ungrateful. I was cruel. I was destroying the family. I said nothing. I just stood there, my posture straight, my hands clasped loosely in front of me. I met each of their gazes and let their anger, their tears, their panic wash over me without effect. My silence was a shield they couldn't penetrate. It unnerved them, their emotional ammunition proving utterly ineffective against this new, calm, unreadable version of me. Finally, my father, incandescent with impotent rage, took a step toward me, his finger jabbing at the air inches from my face. "You were always like this. Always selfish. Always thinking you were better than us with your goddamn uniform and your medals. You are nothing. You are a disgrace to this family." The torrent of his fury washed over me, and when it subsided, the room was left in a ringing silence. All eyes were on me. This was the moment. I took a slow breath and met his blazing eyes. My voice, when it came, was low and steady, carrying no trace of the storm that had just broken around me. "You told me not to come home," I said, my words dropping into the silence like stones into a still pond. "You banned me from this house. So, I came to take possession of my house." I paused, letting the words sink in, watching the flicker of fear finally replace the anger in their eyes. "You are no longer in control here. From now on, you will follow my rules." The collapse was instantaneous and total. My father sank back onto the sofa as if his strings had been cut. My mother's performative tears turned into ragged, genuine sobs of despair. Tyler just stared, his mouth agape, finally understanding that this was not a negotiation. This was a coup, and it was already over. My victory in that living room did not bring the elation I might have expected. It brought a quiet, somber finality. The war was over, and now came the difficult, messy work of dealing with the aftermath. I did not want to become the tyrant they had always accused me of being. My goal was not to inflict pain, but to reclaim my life. Following Ms. Albright's counsel, we gave them a formal, legally binding notice. They had 90 days to vacate the property. It was far more grace than they had ever shown me. Those 90 days were a final, desperate siege. The initial shock wore off and was replaced by a multi-fronted campaign to wear me down. A lawyer they hired sent a series of blustering, baseless letters, which Ms. Albright calmly and methodically dismantled. Then came the calls from the extended family. My Aunt Carol, who hadn't spoken to me in 5 years, called to tell me I was breaking my mother's heart. My Uncle Steve left a rambling, drunken voicemail accusing me of being greedy and disrespectful to my elders. They were the flying monkeys, sent to do the bidding of the wounded monarchs. And their words, while unpleasant, were powerless. I had spent 16 years being judged by these people from afar. Their opinions no longer had any weight. The most difficult assault came from my mother. She left long, meandering voicemails filled with a confusing mix of tearful reminiscence and sharp-toothed guilt. One message would be a soft, wistful memory of us baking Christmas cookies when I was 8. The next would be a choked accusation that my actions were making her physically ill. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation, and I recognized it as her last-ditch effort to pull me back into the old dynamic. I saved the messages, but I never replied. Replying would be re-engaging in a battle I had already won. A week before the deadline, she made a final, desperate move. I was staying in a long-term hotel in a nearby town, and the front desk called to inform me that a Susan Monroe was in the lobby, demanding to see me. My heart hammered in my chest. For a moment, the old instinct to please, to smooth things over, flared up. But I knew that seeing her would be a catastrophic mistake. It would be a surrender. "Please inform her that I am not available to see her," I told the clerk, my voice shaking only slightly, "and that she is not to return." Holding that boundary was one of the hardest and most important things I had ever done. On the day of the deadline, I did not go to the house. I let Mr. Evans, the property manager, handle the final walkthrough and key handover. He called me that afternoon. "They're out," he said. "The keys are on the counter. But I should warn you, it's not pretty." He sent me the photos. The house was empty of their possessions but filled with their resentment. They had left behind overflowing trash cans. A ketchup stain was smeared on a kitchen wall. And in a final symbolic act of petty defiance, they had unscrewed and taken every single light bulb. I looked at the dark, blurry photos of the empty rooms, and I didn't feel anger. I felt a profound, cleansing pity for people so consumed by their own bitterness. A few days later, I walked into the house alone. It was silent and dark, just as the photos had shown. I walked through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing on the bare hardwood floors. The ghosts of my past were everywhere. I stood in the doorway of my childhood bedroom and could almost see the posters on the walls, the stack of books on the nightstand. I stood in the living room where my father's recliner used to be, the spot where he had issued his judgments. The space felt heavy with the residue of years of unhappiness. I sat on the floor in the middle of that empty room and I grieved. I grieved for the family I had always wanted but never had. I grieved for the little girl who had tried so hard to be good enough. And when the tears were done, I felt a sense of release. It was a funeral, and it was a baptism. The idea for what came next didn't arrive in a single flash of inspiration. It grew slowly out of conversations I began to have. I had started attending meetings for a local women veterans group, initially just to find a sense of community. As I listened to their stories, I was struck by how many of them echoed my own. There was Sarah, a former Marine who came home from Iraq to find her husband had left her, and she had nowhere to go. There was Maria, an Air Force mechanic who was struggling with PTSD, and a family that told her to just get over it. There was Lisa, a young Army medic just like me, whose parents had kicked her out because they didn't approve of her lifestyle. We were all soldiers who had come home to a country that thanked us for our service, but didn't know what to do with us. We were all women fighting a new kind of war, a war for a place to belong. My house, I realized, wasn't just my house. It was a solution. It could be the safe landing zone we all so desperately needed. The project consumed me. It gave me a new mission. I used my savings and worked with Ms. Albright to establish a nonprofit organization. I named it the Monroe House, an act of reclaiming my own name from the family who had tarnished it. The physical labor of transforming the house was my therapy. I ripped out the old stained carpets myself. I spent weeks spackling and sanding the walls, smoothing over the cracks of the past. I painted every room a warm, calming color. I didn't want it to feel like a barracks or a shelter. I wanted it to feel like a home. I furnished it with donations and with carefully chosen pieces from secondhand stores. I didn't want my father's angry recliner or my mother's fussy, formal furniture. I wanted comfortable sofas where women could sit and talk, a big dining table where we could share meals, and quiet, private bedrooms where they could feel safe. The day the first two residents moved in was my true homecoming. It was Sarah and Lisa. There were no tears, no dramatic speeches. Just three women carrying their bags into a clean, bright house. That night, we sat on the floor of the living room, eating pizza out of a box, and we talked. We talked about our service, about our families, about our fears and our hopes. For the first time, I was having a conversation where I didn't have to explain myself, where I didn't have to translate my experiences. I was with people who simply understood. I looked around the room, at these strong, resilient women who were now my housemates, my friends, my new family. The house was filled with a quiet, hopeful energy. This was the peace I had been searching for. I hadn't found it by begging for a seat at my family's table. I had found it by building a new table and inviting others to share it with me. The pain of my family's rejection had been the crucible that forged my new purpose. They had meant to exile me, but instead they had set me free. That Christmas, I didn't sit at their table. I built my own. Have you ever been pushed away by the very people who should have stood beside you? Tell me in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you believe justice comes full circle.